All right. Well, we are looking good on time, so thank you all again for joining. We will begin today's webinar. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's grant solicitation webinar, Fiscal Year 2019 Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Grant Program. My name is William Moore, and I am with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published on NTTAC's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube page channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. During today's webinar, presenters will address questions during our Q&A segment. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to your chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there's no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. And I'll give people just a couple of seconds to do so. Again, type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the webinar and will be sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out in your email for the certificate. Please note that only participants that are registered and signed in will receive a certificate of attendance. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. I will now turn the webinar over to our moderator, Cindy Pappas, for today's presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, William. Again, my name is Cindy Pappas. I am a Senior Policy Advisor with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And I will be managing this program, the 2019 Supporting Victims of Gang Violence. I'd like to thank you all. I see we're still, participants are still joining. I appreciate your time and thank you for joining me today. So to get us started, just a little bit of information about our office if you're not familiar. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, is a component of the Office of Justice programs within the U.S. Department of Justice. OJP's program offices include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, also known as the SMART Office. At OJJDP, we envision a nation where our children are free from crime and violence, and if they come into contact with the justice system, that contact should be both just and beneficial to them. By supporting states, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in your efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles, Our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families. During today's webinar, I will provide a brief overview of the FY 2019 Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Grant Program. I will briefly review the solicitation requirements, and I will highlight resources and tools available to help in your application process. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation today. However, please note that I will provide additional contact information as questions arise either after the webinar and during the application process. We have tremendous support services to assist with any technical issues you may have or any other additional questions that you may think of post-webinar. So the solicitation can be found in this link that is provided here. And again, this is the 2019 Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Grant Program. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I'll be walking through the solicitation today, and it might be useful to follow along. Now, I will note when we get into the budget conversation and discussion, there is going to be an change within that. So there will be a new solicitation, an updated solicitation that will be uploaded hopefully by the end of today with additional information. I'm going to cover what that information is, but please note what is listed right at this moment is going to be changing within the next 24 hours. It is a small change, but an important one which I'll highlight. And then I do recommend downloading the revised solicitation this evening or no later than tomorrow. So as you're opening up the solicitation or you have it printed out and are ready to follow along, keep in mind that the applications are due no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 10th, 2019. We strongly suggest that applicants submit your applications at least 72 hours prior to the application due date. This gives Grants.gov, the system in which you'll be applying, time to give you the notification that your application was received, or if there are any rejections for whatever reason, this would give you time any necessary changes. So again, note this due date of June 10th, but really recommend 72 hours prior to that time. So eligible applicants for this program are limited to states, including territories, units of local government, federally recognized Indian tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and institutions of higher education. All recipients and subrecipients, including for-profit organizations, must forego any profit or management fees as part of this award. We do welcome applications under which 2 or more entities would carry out the federal award, but please note only one entity may be the applicant. All others must be proposed as subrecipients or subgrantees. And the applicant who must be the entity that would have primary responsibility for carrying out the award, including the administrative, the funding, and managing the entire program. But we do accept and welcome those that propose with multiple partners. Our target population for this award is it supports efforts of eligible applicant organizations to increase the availability of direct support services for victims of gang-related violence who are under the age of 18, and to develop or enhance the responses to children and youth exposed to gang-related violence in their home, schools, and communities. But again, the target is for those youth who are under the age of 18. So for this grant program, we are seeking proposals from jurisdictions who can indicate a high level of gang violence and who can also demonstrate both a willingness and a readiness to develop community and data-driven responses to youth and their families who are victims of gang-related crime and violence. We expect to make up to 10 awards up to $320,000 each for a 3-year project period starting October 1st, 2019. So I'll leave this slide up here for a second. It's a lot of information, and very often we get a lot of questions and often some budgets that can be a little bit confusing. That The total award that we have received through Congress is $3.2 million. From that, we will be making up to 10 awards. So in your proposals, you should not be requesting more than, so it's up to $320,000, and that is across the 36 months. So that is not $320,000 a year, or $320,000 a year. It is across the entire length of the award, and the award would begin October 1st, 2019. So according to the National Gang Intelligence Center, the most common forms of gang-related criminal activity include violent and drug-related crimes such as assault, street-level drug trafficking, threats and intimidation, robbery, home invasions, homicide, weapons trafficking, and sex trafficking. The purpose of this grant program is designed to increase the availability of direct support services. So say that again, direct support services for victims of gang-related violence, and to develop or enhance the responses to children and youth exposed to gang-related violence in their homes, schools, and communities. This program is also based on the recognition that victims of gang-related violence often experience unique circumstances, particularly trafficked minors and victims who are also gang-involved themselves. That creates a need for additional precautions and expertise as services are delivered. Successful applicants will have clearly articulated in their application their plan and capacity to provide direct services to victims of gang violence. How you will improve or enhance your responses to children exposed to gang-related violence, and how this funding, how this award will help to enhance public safety in your communities through multidisciplinary team responses. And we'll be dissecting each of these components throughout this webinar. Required will include those that focus on community and data-driven responses, that utilize collaborative multidisciplinary approaches to identifying gaps and service needs for victims of gang violence, and those that implement evidence-based or promising models and practices to provide trauma-informed, comprehensive services to victims of gang-related violence. Successful applicants will clearly articulate how you will use a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach to identify and address any gaps and service needs for victims of gang violence. Stakeholders and partners include law enforcement, prosecutors, child and family services, mental health providers, community and faith-based leaders, educators, and parents, all with the intent and purpose in identifying, protecting, and treating children exposed to gang-related violence. Now these, again, are sample program activities. These are not the required, but things you can start to think about what might be useful and supportive in your efforts within your local jurisdictions. What is it that you need? These are some examples to consider that we would consider funding. Developing and implementing screening, identification, assessments, and treatment protocols. Developing or enhancing school-based or community-based intervention and treatment strategies. Developing, expanding, or enhancing hospital-based violence intervention programs, and or funding positions and developing, expanding, or enhancing training interrupters and outreach workers to identify and mediate potentially lethal conflicts in the community. They can also serve to prevent retaliations by working with the victims and friends and families of the victim whenever gang-related violence occurs, and also mediate ongoing conflicts by gathering information from community about ongoing disputes, recent arrests, recent prison releases, and other situations that may lead to further violence or victimization. Again, applicants are not limited to submitting proposals for these types of activities. We really encourage you to consider a wide variety of evidence-based solutions to the problems of providing victims of gang-related violence in your specific communities and jurisdictions. The goal of this program is to support communities in developing evidence-based or promising models, practices, and policies for youth victims of gang-related violence through the following objectives. Improve the system's response to victims of gang-related violence and their families. And these services might include, but are not limited to the ones that I gave examples of in the prior slide, but also thinking about intensive case management, support for victims in court advocacy, housing, safety planning, mental health and substance abuse treatment, medical and dental care, identification or benefits, specialized educational services such as GED, employment assistance, transportation, victim advocacy, and other support services such as an example, accompanying the victim during his or her participation in a criminal prosecution against the offender when appropriate. Second objective is to convene a task force or a working group that meets regularly to identify and address service gaps and barriers, create a blueprint for a comprehensive network of services for youth victims of gang-related violence. Thinking about including these if one does not already exist, think about the following systems: state, local government, victim services, law enforcement, local U.S. attorneys' offices, health services to include physical, mental, and behavioral health, criminal justice, prosecutors, public defenders, courts, education, community and faith-based organizations, and other relevant partners to your specific community and needs. Additional objectives: to use data for program improvement and for measuring outcomes. Applicants should consider data from multiple sectors to include those we've discussed already, but I will repeat: justice, child welfare, public health. Also thinking about your emergency room data and the education system. And finally, the final objective: to reduce and sustain reductions in youth victimization and re-victimization as a result of gang-related violence or witnessing community violence. It will be expected that the goals and objectives are directly related to the performance measurement data required throughout the life of the award. So the performance measures are listed in Appendix A of the solicitation. It's important to familiarize yourself with the data as it will be required for a successful applicant to collect post-award. So please note that that you will not be required to submit the performance data with this application. I'll say that again. You will not be required to submit performance data with this application. The successful applicant will clearly articulate your plan for collecting the data required for the solicitation's performance measures. A vital tool to assist your entire application, and it is linked throughout the entire solicitation, as it is here, is the Grant Resource Guide. It has information on specific post-award reporting requirements, including data. In the solicitation include the OJJDP Model Program Guide, which contains information about evidence-based juvenile justice and youth prevention, intervention, and reentry programs. OJP's crimesolutions.gov, which uses rigorous research to inform practitioners and policymakers about what works in criminal justice, juvenile justice, and crime victim services. Youth.gov provides interactive tools and other resources to help youth-serving organizations and community partnerships plan, implement, and participate in effective programs for youth. And the National Gang Center is a tremendous resource for local communities with chronic as well as emerging gang problems to create comprehensive solutions to prevent gang violence, reduce gang involvement, and suppress gang-related crime. So, now that we have a greater understanding of the purpose of the program, I'll cover what you need to include in your application. I mentioned at the beginning, and I will reiterate at the end of this presentation, if at any time you need technical assistance with submitting an application, you can contact the Grants.gov customer service hotline. And if at any time you have questions about the requirements of the solicitation, you can contact our fabulous folks at the Response Center. The contact information will be provided at the end of this presentation and is also listed on page 2 of the solicitation, because we are about to cover a lot of information. Here is everything that an application should include, and we'll go through each one briefly. Once again, the OJP's Grant Application Resource Guide, which is linked throughout the solicitation, serves as a vital tool as you are developing your proposals. SF 424, this is a required standard form that's used as a cover sheet for submission of pre-applications, applications, and related information. It is completed through Grants.gov and includes your basic information, including your contact, the title of your project, and the amount of funding requested, which we know will not be more than $320,000. The abstract should briefly, 400 words or less, describe the project's purpose, the population to be served, and the activities that the applicant will implement to achieve the project goals and objectives. Again, that sounds like a lot of information to cover in 400 words, but it really is the outward-facing synopsis of what your project is. You'll dive deep into the details in the program narrative, which I'll cover in a moment. We're pretty specific about how we like the format, as this is a competitive process. The abstract should be included as a separate attachment, single-spaced in 12-point font with 1-inch margins. The project abstract will not count against the page limit for the program narrative. So again, a separate abstract. And as you're saving your attachments, it's best to save them as this is an example, project abstract. So when you're saving and uploading and we are downloading and saving and reviewing, we know exactly what the attachments are. Applicants must submit a program narrative that presents a detailed description of the purpose, goals, objectives, strategies, design, and management of the proposed program. Again, pretty specific on the format, double-spaced, 1-inch margins, not exceeding, and this is important, not exceeding 30 pages, using a standard 12-point font. Now you can provide references and any citations as a separate attachment that will not count towards the 30-page program narrative limit. And this is important, again, the 30-page. If the program narrative fails to comply with the length-related restrictions, OJJDP may consider such noncompliance in peer review and in final award decisions. So each of these, again, this is all under the program narrative. The statement of the problem should briefly describe the nature and the scope of the problem that the program will address. In this case, your gang-related activity, gang-related violence, and impact on your communities. Applicants should use data to provide evidence that the problem exists, demonstrate the size and scope of the problem, and document the effects of the problem on the target population, again, which is those youth under the age of 18, and the larger community. Any data or research referenced in the narrative should include information about the source of the data and or a citation. Disclose any research or evaluation studies that relates to the problem and contributes to your understanding of its causes and potential solutions. Applicants should detail how the project will operate throughout the funding period and describe the strategies that you will use to achieve the goals and objectives identified. This section should also include details regarding any leveraged resources. So if anyone from local sources, either cash or in kind, will be supporting the project, this should be listed here, as well as plans for sustainability beyond the grant period. We really do like to see how will your efforts with this funding be sustained post-award. Applicants should include a logic model as a separate attachment that graphically illustrates how the performance measures are related to the project's program, goals, objectives, and design. And again, there is a link to what a template for a logic model and examples within the solicitation. There's a link to that as well. really important to submit a realistic timeline or milestone chart. Again, as a separate attachment, this was not counted toward the 30-page restriction. And this should indicate major tasks associated with the goals and objectives of the project. For each task, you should assign responsibility for each and plot completion of each task by month or quarter for the duration of the award, which we know is a 36-month project period. Capabilities and competencies. This section should describe the experience and capability of the applicant organization and any contractors or subgrantees that you might use to implement and manage this effort and its associated funding. You should highlight any previous experience implementing projects of similar design or magnitude. And you should describe the role and responsibility of project staff and explain the program's organizational structure and operations. Applicants should include a copy of an organizational chart showing how the organization operates, including who manages the finances, how the organization manages subawards, if there are any or will be any proposed, and the management of the project proposed for funding. If you're submitting a joint application, you should provide signed and dated letter of support or memorandum of understanding for all key partners, to include an expression of support for the program and a statement of willingness to participate and collaborate with it. Secondly, a description of the partner's current role and responsibilities in the planning process and expected responsibilities when the program is operational. And finally, an estimate of the percentage of time that the partner will devote to the planning and operation of the project. Letters of support should be addressed to OJJDP Administrator Karen Harp, and only letters of support that are submitted by the due date, which we know is June 10th, and with the full application will be considered during the review process. So if you are going to be soliciting letters of support, if you have a partner that you're developing an MOU, I'd get that started right away, because even if you are timely on your submission, but they are late on their submission of their letters to you, they will not be accepted post June 10th. As I noted earlier, the application should demonstrate the applicant's understanding of the performance data reporting requirements for this grant program and detail how you plan to gather the required data should you receive funding. Again, you are not required to submit performance data with the application. And successful applicants for the 2019 Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Grant Program will report under the Violence Prevention module, which can be found on the OJJDP's website listed here for our performance management data. So familiarize yourself with what we will be seeking to collect, develop a plan on how you plan to collect that data, and that is the narrative that we would need. The budget detail worksheet, and this is where there will be a change in the revised solicitation that will be posted. And for those that might have joined late, the solicitation that is up at this exact moment will be changing within the next 24 hours with a slight modification, which I'll cover during this section. But for this, all applicants should use the Excel version of OJDP's budget detail worksheet when completing the proposed budget in the application. And there's a link in the solicitation as well as here. You should include a thorough and clear description of every cost listed in the narrative section for each budget category. The budget must be complete, cost-effective, and allowable. So what do we mean by allowable? Reasonable, allocable, and necessary for project. Budget narrative should demonstrate generally how applicants will maximize cost-effectiveness of grant expenditures, and budget narrative should demonstrate cost-effectiveness in relation to potential alternatives and goals of the project. The narrative should be mathematically sound and correspond clearly with the line item computations provided in the budget detail worksheet. So I said that twice, just in two different ways. Technically sound, complete, It says an allowable. Now, the change that you will see in the version, the new solicitation that will be uploaded in the next 24 hours is a reference to our training and technical assistance provider. We will be providing support to the funded sites that are addressing youth gang violence. And through this solicitation, you will be expected, for those who are funded, to work closely with this TTA provider. And successful applicants are expected to participate in an up to 3-day cross-site grantee meeting each year of the project and budget for as many as 3 representatives to travel to attend these meetings. I'll say that again and I'll slow it down a little bit. So in the budget, you will be required to include travel to a grantee site meeting up to 3 days each year. And there'll be some guidance in the solicitation, again, in the revised, but what is currently posted right now is not the final solicitation. It'll be updated within the next 24 hours and will include language and guidance in the budget information and associated documentation section of the solicitation. Again, I'm just going to say it one more time again because it's not in there right now. We support a National Training and Technical Assistance Center to provide assistance to OJJDP funded sites addressing youth gang violence. Sites funded through this solicitation are expected to work closely with this TTA provider, and successful applicants are expected to participate in an up to 3-day cross-site grantee meeting in each year of the project and budget for as many as 3 representatives to travel to attend these meetings. So in addition to everything we just covered, there's additional information, and the OJP's resource guide, which is linked throughout the solicitation, provides guidance. I'm going to go through each one briefly as well, just so you're familiar and you start thinking about whether or not it's applicable to you, and some are applicable to current, meaning unexpired, federally approved indirect cost rate is to attach a copy of the indirect cost rate agreement to the application. Tribal authorizing resolution, a tribe, tribal organization, or third party that proposes to provide direct services or assistance to residents on tribal lands should include in its application a resolution letter, affidavit, or other documentation as appropriate that demonstrates that the applicant has the requisite authorization from the tribe or tribes to implement the proposed project on tribal lands. Financial management and system of internal controls questionnaire. Every OJP applicant must submit this questionnaire, and there's a link in the solicitation. Additionally, every applicant must complete the disclosure of lobbying activities and submit this information. Even if you are not expending any funds for lobbying activities, you still must submit this form and enter NA in the text boxes for item 10. Applicant disclosure of pending applications. Each applicant is to disclose whether it has or is proposed as a subrecipient under any pending application for federally funded grants or cooperative agreements that 1, include requests for funding to support the same project being proposed in the application under this solicitation, and 2, would cover any identical cost items outlined in the budget submitted to OJP as part of the application under this solicitation. So whether you have to send, it's just a separate attachment, applicant disclosure of pending application saying whether you are or are not. So even if you are not, that is a required document. An applicant that is designated as a DOJ high-risk grantee is to submit as a separate attachment to its application information that OJP will use, among other pertinent information, to determine whether it will consider or select the application for an award. And finally, if you are proposing research or evaluation, you must demonstrate research research or evaluation independence and integrity, including appropriate safeguards before you may receive award funds. Again, a tremendous amount of information, and you can use the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide as a tool to help you walk through each one of these requirements. This is new this year under this program and many of our other solicitations in FY19. Priority consideration in award decisions to applications that propose projects that directly benefit federally designated qualified opportunity zones. So these are programs if you plan to invest in economically distressed communities. Think programs that would benefit a disaster area. Should provide a narrative explaining the public safety benefit. So if this is new to you, if you're not sure if you are a qualified opportunity zone, the link to the U.S. Department of the Treasury's resource page is right there, and that has a full list of currently designated qualified opportunity zones. So again, this is new to us, and I'm sure it's new to you as well. So, got through the entire application process, you're ready to roll, and where do you do it? You must register in advance with Grants.gov prior to submitting an application. Again, all applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 10th, 2019. To be considered timely, an application must be submitted by the application deadline using Grants.gov, and the applicant must have received a validation message from Grants.gov that indicates successful and timely submission. This is why, as I mentioned in the beginning, and I reiterate now, that we really urge you to submit applications at least 72 hours prior to this deadline of June 10th. This will allow time to receive this validation message or a rejection notification from Grants.gov, and this will give you time to fix any problems that may have caused the rejection notification. We also encourage you to sign up for Grants.gov email notifications regarding the solicitation. In the event it is modified, as it will be within the next 24 hours, those who sign up with Grants.gov for updates will automatically be notified. Leave this here for a moment, and again, it is listed within the solicitation. If at any time there are questions regarding the requirements, this is the place to call, the Response Center. Their hours are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, and 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the solicitation close date, which is June 10th. They're fabulous. They will help walk you through any questions you have regarding this solicitation. And then any technical assistance that you have. Now, our Grants.gov support hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except federal holidays, with any of the technological issues that you may encounter when submitting your applications or questions you may have. So you have your submission into Grants.gov in a timely fashion. So after, we are committed to ensuring a fair and open process for awarding grants through our peer review process. Peer reviewers will review the applications submitted under this solicitation that meet basic minimum requirements. Basic minimum requirements mean that the application was submitted by an eligible type of applicant. The application requested funding within programmatic funding constraints. The application was responsive to the scope of the solicitation, and the application included all items designated as critical elements. And once it goes through this rigorous peer review process, award notifications will be made to those selected applicants. So that was a lot of information, I am well aware, and we are now at the question and answer portion. We actually received quite a few inquiries to our response center prior to this webinar. I'm assuming many were from you. So I'm going to have William ask those first, and hopefully we'll address any other questions that may be brewing based on this discussion. And then I'll address as many additional questions from you all with the time remaining. Also noting again that any questions at any time can be addressed to the response center, and we'll put that information up once again towards the end. So, William, what was our first question that we received in advance?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. So our first question that we have, are there examples of previously funded projects under this award?
Actually, that's a great question. No, there's not, because this is the first year we are offering this program, and I'm really excited to be managing this award, but no, we don't have examples from last year that we could share, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next question we have here, as a follow-up, will OJJDP offer this solicitation in fiscal year 2020?
Oh boy, I hope so. It's too soon to know what the FY20 budget will include. However, interest in solicitations is definitely a consideration. I guess the best resource to identify plans for FY20 when they become available is OJP's Funding Resource Center. I'll say that again if you'd like to Google it, and I'll give you the website, but it's OJP's Funding Resource Center at ojp.gov/funding. Now we note this in the solicitation, we may in certain cases provide additional funding in future years to awards made under this FY19 solicitation through continuation awards, but that is something we won't know again until next year.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. And for our audience, I did place that website in the chat pod there for those who would like to access it. Great.
Oh,
Cindy, perfect. Is the funding $3,200 per year for 3 years, total $900,060, or is it $300,020 over the 3 years? And I believe you mentioned this on slide 18, if I'm correct. Yeah.
Yep, I'll take you back, and that's why I probably stated it over and over again, but it is the question we get, because it can get a little bit confusing when you're looking at $3.2 million. I mean, that's a tremendous amount. So just to bring it up again, and it's really important, you should be applicants should be applying for funding up to $320,000 across the 36-month award. So no, it is not $960,000. It's not 3.2 going to one jurisdiction. It is $320,000 each.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Cindy. Now, another follow-up question for you here. Is there a match requirement for this funding?
No, there is not a match for this solicitation. If successful applicants propose a voluntary match, that's acceptable. It's just important to note that if we approve that budget, the total match amount incorporated into the approved budget becomes mandatory and subject to audit. So if you're putting in that you're going to have a match, you'll be required to do so.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I have another question here that we have that came in. In regards to the target population, how is youth defined for the purposes of this grant? Is it 18 and under, 12 to 25?
Great question. The target population is under the age of 18.
Outstanding. And how will I be notified if my agency is selected to receive this particular award, Cindy?
That's always the question. I should actually put these in my slide. Both the point of contact and the authorizing official listed on the grant application will receive an email award notification. So that will provide further information on procedures for receiving the funds. And applicants receiving an award will be notified by September 30th, 2019.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that. And as a follow-up, how will I be notified if my agency is not selected to receive an award?
Yes, both, again, the point of contact and the authorizing official listed on the grant application will receive an email notification and summary of your peer review comments, which can be really useful as you're learning and developing your proposals and learning from what might have been missed and what the peer review comments were. And those comments would be received by those applicants not funded by October 30th, 2019.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Sydney, this solicitation states that it will fund entities that implement evidence-based or promising models and practices to provide trauma-informed comprehensive services for victims for gang-related violence. Do you have any examples of evidence-based programs?
Yes, I do. Now, where did I put my additional resources?
I believe we had it here on slide number 25, if I'm correct.
25.
Let me go.
Well, evidence-based models and programs, let's see. And if not, I'll have you put crimesolutions.gov into the chat if you don't mind.
Yes.
But evidence-based models and programs, it includes those that have been shown through rigorous evaluation and replication to be effective at preventing or reducing juvenile delinquency or related risk factors. And that's why I want to pull up crimesolutions.gov website is one resource that applicants may use to find information about what we mean and what we're talking about as we're discussing evidence-based programs in criminal justice, juvenile justice, and crime victim services.
Fantastic. And for our audience, did indeed provide the website. There is the chat pod. Are there other gang-related grant opportunities through OJJDP?
Yes, there are. We actually, there is an award that's available on our, or not an award, a solicitation that's up on our website right now. It is our FY19 Youth Gang Suppression Implementation Grants Program. And you can learn more about this and our other OJJDP funding at www.ojjdp.gov. And you can go onto our funding page there. But yes, there is additional grant focused on gang-related suppression implementation grants program.
Fantastic. And again, for our audience, I did indeed put that link in the chat for you to access. Thank you for that, Cindy. All right, we're coming up on our last few questions that we have here. Now, Cindy, say hypothetically I'm a survivor of gang violence. Can I apply for this particular funding?
Let's get back up to our eligibility. There we are. So no, going back, eligible applicants are limited to states, including territories and units of local government. As far as a victim of and survivor of gang violence, just separately, and this has nothing to do with the solicitation, but I would call your attention, if this came from someone on the line now, to the resources available and offered through our sister agency at the Office for Victims of Crime, specifically their Crime Victims Fund to help victims and victim service providers.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Cindy. And so those are all the questions that we've received in advance. If you'd like to respond to any questions in the chat box that have not been addressed, please note that we have about 9 minutes remaining. For our audience, please remember any other questions that you have for Cindy can be put in the chat pod, and we will address them with the time that we have allotted.
Okay, got a couple here addressing the eligibility. We covered that. Does the budget pages submission account for 1 year or all 3? So the budget detail worksheet should account for all 3 years. And if you follow that worksheet, there are tabs to follow that include year 1, year 2, and year 3, and areas for the narrative. It's all in one place now. And then also within that tab will be a budget summary. So the summary that calculates your total should not be more than $320,000. And along those lines, saw a question, can you request funding up to less than $320,000? Yes, absolutely. So being specific in your needs, you can apply for less than that amount. And that could change the number of awards that we can fund, but that we will not know until we go through the application process. Question, can sites that have a current safe and thriving cooperative agreement apply and be considered for this grant opportunity? That's a great question. Yes, you can apply. You would just clearly have to articulate how this grant is different than the funding that you've received under Safe and Thriving. While it can complement, it should not duplicate those efforts. And depending on what year, whether you are an FY16 or FY17 grantee, some of the 16s are coming to a close. So this grant opportunity would not begin until possibly your grant is ending. So there are all things to consider, but I would absolutely still apply if you are current Safe and Thriving. Is there a reapplication process for each of the 3 years? No. If you are awarded this funding, it is yours for the 3-year term of the award. Can it be less? I answered that. Yes, so question about the target, can the grant include direct family services for adults that are impacted? The target audience is youth under the age of 18, and then other services that, that support the family. But the target audience are not direct family services for adults impacted by gang violence. Will self-reported data be acceptable re-victimization if official data law enforcement isn't available? Yes, use what you have. Use any data that you have available within your communities and jurisdictions. The note that psychological harm may not be able to be documented by official sources, that is accurate. But also thinking maybe outside of the box and thinking of your partners, as I mentioned earlier, within your school system. The impact, whether any surveys that might have been conducted within the school, if there is a partner within institution of higher education, one of your universities, if they're doing work, or any studies within your jurisdiction and communities, thinking about partnering with your hospitals. What are they seeing as far as impact of violent crime data? All things to be considered. Question, can nonprofits apply as lead agency? Yes. Getting back to eligibility, nonprofits may apply. So nonprofit organizations and institutions of higher education, in addition to states, including territories, units of local government, and federally recognized Indian tribal governments are all eligible. What is the duration period given when you receive the grant and start date? The duration is the 36 months from October 1st. So that would be your start date to September of 2023. Sorry, I had to do some math there. Of yes, 2022. Can funding be used for facilitation services of the task force? Yes, if it can be tied into support that goes directly to services for victims of gang violence or to support task force or working groups efforts in addressing children's exposure to gang-related violence in their home, schools, and communities, could absolutely be used. clarification again on the target audience age is under the age of 18. Is this a reimbursable grant turnaround time for monies to be received? Yes, so this is, it is a reimbursable grant, and then depending on, you submit your budget, and then I'm not certain about the turnaround for how quickly the monies are received. That is a good question. We can find the answer to that. Can you submit more than one proposal for services in different geographical areas? So what we do accept only one application from an applicant, and the most recent application will be the one that will be reviewed. So if you partner with other agencies that are, and you would be a subaward or an MOU, you would have to disclose that within your pending application. So no, we do not accept multiple applications from a single applicant. Do you have a clear definition of what constitutes victimization? And we do have some language within the solicitation. That would be really determined by the applicant, what you're finding in your data. We would like to hear what you define as victimization as it relates to your jurisdiction and your community, and again, based on the data in the program narrative, as you are defining the scope of the problem, that's where that would go. Can funds be used for salaries of violence interrupters that respond to hospitals, street violence, and any outreach efforts? Absolutely. So this funding can be used for faculty, staff and volunteers, including violence interrupters and outreach workers. All right, William, I think we're coming down to the 2-minute mark. I don't want to end, but I will put up the Response Center contact information for all additional questions. Oh, you're going into it. You got it. All right, I thank you so much. William, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, sure, no problem, Cindy. Thank you. And I'll actually, after I finish my last slides here, I'll leave up that contact information for the response center for a couple of seconds for those individuals. Also, keep in mind, everyone, that the handouts are indeed located in the handouts pod where you can access that information, including the response center information. And also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page. But again, thank you very much, Cindy, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Just a few last-minute announcements to keep in mind. Please remember that you can contact NTTAC through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for our NTTAC's TTA listserv. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. And remember, as I mentioned earlier, you can also contact OJJDP via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. Do you have a training and technical assistance need? If so, please submit a request via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform through the link displayed on this slide. And as a reminder, as I mentioned earlier, the webinar is recorded and will be archived on our YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. Remember, for the event transcript and even supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. And lastly, we would greatly appreciate it if you all would take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback evaluation. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you and goodbye.